Good morning. I am going to go ahead and get started this morning with our first read aloud. Our learning target today is I can investigate the setting of a fantasy story by looking at clues about the time period, magical elements, by using the cover, summary, and details from the beginning of the story. Okay, so first thing I am going to do is we're going to look at this book right here called The Paper Bag Princess. Okay, and basically we're going to look at this book to help us identify the fantasy genre. So if I go ahead and I just even read the first couple pages, we're going to see how the setting is really important in identifying the genre. So it says, Elizabeth was a beautiful princess. She lived in a castle and had expensive princess clothes. She was going to marry a prince named Ronald. So already you can tell that this is going to be fantasy. It's talking about prince and princesses. One of the things you can also do is look at the cover. So there's a dragon on the cover. That's pretty telling. Unfortunately, a dragon smashed her castle, burned all her clothes with his fiery breath, and carried off Prince Ronald. Okay, so that's just a little bit to show us about the setting of a fantasy story. So there was a castle, there was a dragon that burned the castle down. It's very telling that the genre of this book is going to be a fantasy. So some of the elements of fantasy and one of the huge telling signs of fantasy is magic. So as we're reading, I'll read aloud together, which, like I said, is called The Thief of Always. We're going to be looking for elements of the setting, asking ourselves how the setting affects our characters, and also what problems is the setting causing for our characters. So remember, it's been a while, I know, but hopefully you're doing it home while you're reading. You first want to identify the genre of your book that you're reading. So if you remember, the first question we ask ourselves is, does this story have a character? Okay, so I glance at the cover. It says The Thief of Always. And this part right here is really going to help me out. So it says menacing demons, wondrous miracles, sinister magic, and vivid characters. A compulsive, lightning-paced tale that begs to be read aloud. So right there, I also already know that I have characters. So this is going to be a narrative. That means it's a story, okay? Every character is going to go through the same structure of the story that we've talked about. Somebody wanted, but so then finally. After we have identified that this is a narrative, then we want to ask ourselves what type of narrative. Okay, so in our learning target, I said that you can read the cover, look at the summary, and details from the beginning of the story. So I'm going to read, and this is with permission of HarperCollins Children's Books. So this is The Thief of Always. I'm going to read just the first couple lines, and I'm going to see how that helps me to be able to identify the genre. And our first chapter of The Thief of Always is called Harvey Half Devoured. The great gray beast February had eaten Harvey Swick alive. Here he was, buried in the belly of that smothering month, wondering if he would ever find his way out through the cold coils that lay between here and Easter. Okay, so that does set the tone a little bit for me. I'm going to come back to the cover, though, because what I read, I don't know if you noticed, I'm going to read this again. It says, menacing demons, wondrous miracles, sinister magic. Okay, so that's what's really going to help me to know that the genre of this book is a fantasy. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and get started. And I want you just thinking back to The Magician's Elephant, because that was definitely a fantasy book. Okay, so we had magic in that book. We had a magician that made an elephant appear and disappear, and just things happened that couldn't happen in reality. Okay, so as I'm reading, I want you paying attention to the setting, and I'll be stopping and maybe pointing some things out as I go, keeping these questions in mind. So how does the setting influence the characters, and what issues or problems are caused by the setting? Okay. The great gray beast February had eaten Harvey Swick alive. Here he was, buried in the belly of that smothering month, wondering if he would ever find his way out through the cold coils that lay between here and Easter. He didn't think much of his chances. More than likely, he'd become so bored as the hours crawled by that one day he'd simply forget to breathe. Then maybe people would get to wondering why such a fine young lad had perished in his prime. It would become a celebrated mystery, which wouldn't be solved until some great detective decided to recreate a day in Harvey's life. Then and only then would the grim truth be discovered. The detective would first follow Harvey's route to school every morning, trekking through the dismal streets. Then he'd sit at Harvey's desk and listen to the pitiful drone of the history teacher and the science teacher and wonder how the heroic boy had managed to keep his eyes open. And finally, as the wasted day dwindled to dusk, he'd trace the homeward trek, and as he set foot on the step from which he had departed that morning, and people asked him, as they would, why such a sweet soul as Harvey had died, he would shake his head and say, "It's very simple." "Oh," the curious crowd would say, "do tell." And brushing away a tear, the detective would reply, "Harvey Swick was eaten by the great gray beast, February." It was a monstrous month, that was for sure, a dire and dreary month. The pleasures of Christmas, both sharp and sweet, were already dimming in Harvey's memory, and the promise of summer was so remote as to be mythical. There'd be a spring break, of course, but how far was that? 5 weeks? 6? Mathematics wasn't his strong point, so he didn't irritate himself further by attempting, and failing, to calculate the days. He simply knew that long before the sun came to save him, he would have withered away in the belly of the beast. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for a second because just as a reader, I am noticing some things about the setting and the way that the author is describing the setting. So at the very beginning, it said the great beast of February had eaten Harvey Swick alive, buried in the belly of that smothering month. Okay, so the tone's really dreary. They talk about how gray it is. He was so bored. And just February was a really tough month for him. They kept saying it was a monstrous month. It was a dire and dreary month. Okay, and he was looking forward to Christmas. He was looking forward to spring break, but he couldn't even calculate how far that was. So not just where the action is happening, but also when the action is happening is part of the setting. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and continue, and I'm going to look for more clues about the setting, and mostly how is the setting influencing my character. "You shouldn't waste your time sitting up here," his mom said when she came in and found him watching the raindrops chase each other down the glass of his bedroom window. "I've got nothing better to do," Harvey said, without looking around. "Well, then you can make yourself useful," his mom said. Harvey shuddered. Useful? That was another word for hard labor. He sprang up, marshaling his excuses. He hadn't done this. He hadn't done that. But it was too late. "You can start by tidying up this room," his mom said. "But, well, don't sit wishing the days away, honey. Life's too short." "But that's a good boy." And with that, she left him to it, muttering to himself. He stared around the room. It wasn't even untidy. There were 1 or 2 games scattered around. A couple of drawers open, a few clothes hanging out. Looked just fine. "I am 10, he said to himself, having no brothers and sisters. He talked to himself a good deal. "I mean, it's not like I'm a kid. I don't have to tidy up just because she says so. It's boring." He wasn't just muttering now. He was talking out loud. I want to. He went to the mirror and quizzed it. What do I want? The straw-haired, snub-nosed, brown-eyed boy he saw before him shook his head. "I don't know what I want," he said. "I just know I'll die if I don't have some fun. I'll die." As he spoke, the window rattled. A gust of wind blew hard against it, then a second, then a third, and even though Harvey didn't remember the window being so much as an inch ajar, it was suddenly thrown open. I'm going to stop there before I continue. Okay, so this is more of the setting. So he's basically in his room watching the raindrops fall down the glass. And he's really, really bored. So this month of February is just really affecting him to the fact that he's bored up until the point that he's like, if I don't have something fun to do, I'm just going to die. Okay. His mom comes in. She's like telling him to clean his room. He's like, I don't want to clean my room. I'm 10 years old. I shouldn't have to do it just because she tells me to. Okay. So then something happens. The wind blows his window open, and I'm going to continue. Cold rain spattered his face. Half closing his eyes, he crossed to the window and fumbled to slam it, making sure that the latch was in place this time. The wind had started his lamp moving, and when he turned back, the whole room seemed to be swinging around. One moment, the light was blazing in his eyes. The next, it was flooding the opposite wall. But in between the blaze and the flood, it lit the middle of his room, and standing there, shaking the rain off his hat, was a stranger. He looked harmless enough. He was no more than 6 inches taller than Harvey, his frame scrawny, his skin distinctly yellowish in color. He was wearing a fancy suit, a pair of spectacles, and a lavish smile. "Who are you?" Harvey demanded, wondering how he could get past this interloper to the door. "Don't be nervous," the man replied, teasing off one of his suede gloves, taking Harvey's hand and shaking it. "My name's Ritkus." "You are Harvey Swick, aren't you?" "Yes." "I thought for a moment I'd got the wrong house." Harvey couldn't take his eyes off Rictus's grin. It was wide enough to shame a shark with 2 perfect rows of gleaming teeth. Rictus took off his spectacles, pulled a handkerchief from the pocket of his waterlogged jacket, then started to mop off the raindrops. Either he or the handkerchief gave off an odor that was far from fragrant. The smell, in truth, was flatulent. "You've got questions, I can see that," Rictus said to Harvey. "Well, yeah. Ask away, I've got nothing to hide." "Well, how did you get in, for one thing?" "Well, through the window, of course." "It's a long way up from the street." "Well, not if you're flying." "Flying?" "Of course. How else was I going to get around on a foul night like this? It was either that or a rowboat. We short folk got to watch out when it's raining this hard. One wrong step and you're swimming." He peered at Harvey quizzically. "Do you swim?" "Well, in the summer sometimes," Harvey replied, wanting to get back to the business of flying. But Rickus took the conversation in another direction entirely. "On nights like this," he said, "doesn't it seem like there will never be another summer?" "Well, it sure does," said Harvey. Okay, so there's just another thing that with the setting that Rictus is pointing out, like it is pouring down rain, and just when it's like this, doesn't it seem like summer's never going to come again? Okay, so that's just part of the setting that's affecting Harvey and showing how bored and like restless he's getting. Remember, he said he's going to die if something doesn't happen soon. "You know, I heard you sighing a mile off, and I said to myself, there's a kid who needs a vacation." He consulted his watch. "If you've got the time, that is." "The time?" "For a trip, boy, for a trip. You need an adventure, young Swick. Somewhere out of this world." "How'd you hear me sighing when you were a mile away?" Harvey wanted to know. "Well, why should you care? I heard you. That's all that matters." "Is it magic of some kind?" "Well, maybe." "Why won't you tell me?" Rictus gave Harvey a beady stare. "I think you're too inquisitive for your own good, that's why," he said, his smile decaying a little. "If you don't want help, that's fine by me." He made a move toward the window. The wind was still gusting against the glass, as though eager to come back in and carry its passenger away. Okay, so I'm just going to stop. Even though this isn't the setting, it's another part of just our story elements. We already have the problem that our character has right here. That's connected to the setting. But now it seems like the character that just came into the story, Rictus, is offering some sort of solution for the current setting. Okay, so he's offering him to take him somewhere. He says, "Oh, you need a vacation. It is time for a trip. You need an adventure." Okay, and then he's like, "Well, if you don't want help, that's fine by me." So it seems that he's going to start to leave right here. Wait, Harvey said. For what? I'm sorry, I won't ask any more questions. Rictus halted, his hand on the latch. No more questions, eh? I promise, said Harvey. I told you I'm sorry. So you did. So you did. Rictus peered out at the rain. I know a place where the days are always sunny, he said, and the nights full of wonders. Could you take me there? We said no questions, boy. We agreed. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Being a forgiving sort, I'll forget you spoke. And I'll tell you this, if you want me to inquire on your behalf, I'll see if you've got room for another guest. Why, I like that. I'm not quarantining anything, Rictus said, opening the latch. I understand. The wind gusted suddenly and blew the window wide. The light began to swing wildly. Watch for me, Rictus yelled above the din of the rain and wind. Harvey started to ask him if he'd be coming back soon, but stopped himself in the nick of time. No questions, boy, Rictus said. And as he spoke, the wind seemed to fill up his coat. It rose around him like a black balloon, and he was suddenly swept out over the windowsill. Questions rot the mind, he hollered as he went. Keep your mouth shut and we'll see what comes your way. And with that, the wind carried him off, the balloon of his coat rising like a black moon against the rainy sky. And that's the end of chapter 1. Okay, so remember, our learning target is that we are researching the setting, asking ourselves how the setting affects the characters, and also asking ourselves what problems does the setting create for the characters. And it is very evident, even in just this first chapter, that first of all, this is a fantasy due to the magic. Okay, he even asks him at one point, is this magic? And Rictus says, well, we're not asking questions. So we have elements of magic. We have elements of things that are just not believable. First of all, this dude is flying through the streets and comes into this kid's room saying he could hear how frustrated and bored he was from a mile away. So Harvey is frustrated, bored, ready to just die of boredom because of February, because of the weather, because he is stuck in his room. His mom is telling him to clean his room. I'm sure everybody can relate, especially at this time when we're all stuck at home. Okay, so imagine what you would think if this dude shows up and is ready to take you on a trip. That's how Harvey's feeling right now. Okay, so as we read fantasy books, fantasy readers research the setting and ask ourselves how it connects to characters and how it influences the characters. So as you're reading your books today, you're going to be asking yourselves that. If you log on, you haven't done it yet, but on Classroom, there's a whole plan for you for the week, and it tells you that you're going to be selecting your own fantasy book from the collection on Epic. And as you read, I want you doing the things that I just did. Thinking about the genre, investigating, researching the setting, and seeing how it affects your character, and maybe what problems it causes for your character as well. When you're finished, there's a link to Lino. You're going to just click on that link, and you're going to answer your questions on a Post-it note. I'll be available. If you have questions, you can contact me on Classroom, Parent Square, or email. And I'll just be checking in and checking your work throughout the day. Okay? So have a great day. See you tomorrow for chapter 2, same time, same place. Miss you guys.